2 words. That's all it took to empty 11 star systems in under 6 hours. Not a weapon, not a threat. 2 words, spoken by a hospice nurse who was only trying to say goodbye. Somewhere above the Pacific, in a station so old the paint had started to flake off the bulkheads in curls like dead leaves, Amara Okonkwo-Reyes was drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm 40 minutes ago and hadn't noticed. She noticed most things late. She'd tell you that herself if you asked, in that flat, unbothered voice of hers. I noticed things 3 minutes after they matter. It was a joke. It was also the truest thing about her. The deep silence observatory hummed around her, the way it always hummed at 300 hours, analog dials ticking, an old cassette deck spooling quietly in the corner because nobody had ever bothered to decommission it, and the soft green wash of monitors that were, technically, older than most of the junior staff who serviced them. Earth's furthest listening post. Earth's forgotten room. The place the Concordance of 11 had assigned humanity, because humanity was, in the language of the Concordance's own classification system, probationary, analog tier, non-critical. Nobody knew in that moment that in 6 hours the words Amara Okonkwo-Reyes was about to type into a dying transmission channel would be heard, mistranslated, and acted upon by 11 advanced civilizations spanning 4,000 light-years, and that every single one of them would be wrong about what those words meant, and every single one of them would live because of that wrongness. This is how it happened. Amara had been a palliative care nurse for 20 years before she ever touched a listening post console. Cebu General, the hospice wing, 3rd floor, the one with the window that caught the sunset if you angled the bed just right. She used to angle the beds herself. She used to hold hands that were losing their grip minute by minute. And she learned, the way you learn anything that matters, by doing it too many times to count. The exact cadence a voice needs to carry someone out gently, not loud, not urgent, steady, low, unhurried, like a hand on the small of someone's back guiding them toward a door they were already walking toward. She learned when silence was the kindest thing you could offer. She learned when a single sentence, timed exactly right, could undo a lifetime of fear in a person's final seconds. And she learned once what it cost to be 3 minutes late. Her mother had been dying for 11 days by the time the call came. Amara was 2 floors away, finishing rounds on someone else's mother, someone else's dying. Because that was the job. That was always the job. You don't get to choose whose hand you're holding when the moment comes. She ran. She remembers running. She remembers the elevator taking 180 seconds that felt like a geological age. And she remembers arriving in a room that was already quiet in the wrong way. And a nurse, a colleague, a friend, saying so gently it was almost worse than shouting, "She went 3 minutes ago, Amara. I'm so sorry. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Not 11 days. Not a lifetime of small failures to visit more, to call more, to say the things daughters are supposed to say to mothers before it's too late. 3 minutes. A number so small and so exact that it became the shape of her grief forever after. She never got to say goodbye. She got to arrive after goodbye had already happened without her. She left hospice work 4 years later. She went into signals monitoring instead. A strange pivot. Everyone said so, from holding hands to reading static. But Amara understood something about herself that no one else quite grasped. She had spent 2 decades listening for the exact moment a life ended. Signals work was the same skill, aimed outward instead of inward. Listening for the moment something ends. Listening for the silence underneath the noise. She was good at it. She was, by the admission of engineers twice her age, frighteningly good at it. The kind of good that comes from 20 years of learning to hear what a monitor doesn't show you. Which was why, at 0314 hours on an unremarkable Tuesday, she was the only person in the Sol system who noticed that 3 known star systems had simply stopped talking. "Ferris," she said, not raising her voice, not even fully turning from her console. "Come look at this." Ferris Boyle, 26 years old, Second-generation observatory tech, the kind of restless energy Amara found exhausting and endearing in equal measure. Rolled his chair over, spilling a little of his own coffee on a logbook nobody used anymore, except as a coaster. Look at what? I don't see anything. That's the thing. Amara tapped the screen once, twice, with a finger that had a faint, persistent tremor. A small vibration nobody in 20 years had ever managed to explain, put down eventually to too many overnight shifts and too much caffeine and a nervous system that had simply decided, sometime in her 40s, to hum a little. You don't see anything. There's no light curve change, no radiation spike, no gravitational anomaly, nothing on any spectrum we track. 3 systems that were broadcasting standard concordance beacon chatter an hour ago are now producing absolutely nothing. Not degraded signal, not jammed signal. No signal at all, like someone reached in and erased the space where the signal used to be. Ferris squinted at the readouts. Could be equipment failure. 3 separate systems, 3 separate failures at the exact same moment, Amara said quietly. Yes. She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. It was, if anything, the stillness in her tone that made Ferris go cold, because in 3 years working under her, he'd learned that Amara Okonkwo-Reyes got quieter, not louder, the more frightened she was. I'm going to flag it, she said, and nobody is going to care because we're a Tier 9 observation post, and Tier 9 flags go into a queue that gets reviewed by an automated triage system that hasn't been updated in 6 years, and by the time a human eye sees it. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ferris knew the ending. Everyone at the observatory knew the ending. Humanity's flags went to the bottom of the Concordance's attention stack, filed under probationary species, non-priority, and stayed there until someone with actual authority happened to notice. She flagged it anyway. She always flagged it anyway. 20 years of hospice work teaches you that the alarm matters even when nobody's listening, because someday, someone will be, and that someday is worth preparing for. She had no idea how right she was about to be. The old astronomer's name was Halvard Pettersson, 81 years old, stationed at a private research relay 2 light hours past Neptune. A legacy post, one of the last fully human-crewed deep listening stations left in the outer system, kept alive mostly by Halvard's stubbornness and a grant nobody had thought to cancel. Amara had known him for 6 years, talked to him most weeks. He was, in his own words, the last man doing this job because I refuse to let it end while I'm still breathing. And he said it with the kind of dry humor that made Amara like him instantly the first time they spoke. At 0341 hours, 27 minutes after Amara flagged the anomaly, Halvard's channel crackled open. Not the clean digital handshake of a modern connection, but the old analog static hiss of a signal traveling across 2 light hours on infrastructure older than most of the Concordance's youngest member species. Amara. His voice was thin, thinner than she'd ever heard it. Are you seeing this out there? I'm seeing something, she said. 3 systems gone dark, no signature. Halvard, what's your status? A long pause. Too long. In hospice work, Amara had learned the exact weight of a pause like that. The pause a person takes when they're deciding whether to tell you the truth or spare you. My status, Halvard said finally, is that something just passed within 400,000 kilometers of this station, and it left no trace on any instrument I own except one, a paper strip chart recorder. God help me, the kind you crank by hand, the kind nobody's used since before you were born. And on that paper, and only on that paper, there's a line. A straight, dead flat line where there should be background noise. Something erased the noise floor itself, Amara. Not the signal, the noise. Do you understand what that means? You understand? She did. It meant something had passed through that stretch of space and taken the ordinary hum of the universe with it, the cosmic microwave background, the residual electromagnetic murmur that every instrument in existence used as its baseline. If you can silence that, you're not jamming a signal. You're erasing the canvas the signal is painted on. "Halvard," she said very carefully, very steadily, in the voice she used to use at 3 a.m., in a hospice room when a patient's breathing had changed in a way only she could hear. "I need you to tell me your life support numbers." Another pause, shorter this time. 61%, he said, and falling. Whatever passed near us clipped the array. "I've got maybe 4 hours before the backup cells go, and no ship in range to pull me out in time. Concordance Rescue Protocol puts response time for a Tier 9 outer system post at 11 hours minimum." He gave a short, dry laugh that had no humor in it at all. 11 hours, for 4 hours of air. Amara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them and did what 20 years of hospice work had trained into her at a level below conscious thought. She made her voice a hand on the small of someone's back, guiding them toward a door they were already walking toward, whether either of them wanted it or not. "I'm not leaving this channel," she said. "You're not doing this alone." For the next 2 hours and 51 minutes, Amara Okonkwo-Reyes stayed on an open channel with a dying man 2 light hours away, while around her, unnoticed, unremarked, the true crisis of the galaxy began to unfold. She didn't know it yet. Nobody at the observatory knew it yet. While Amara sat with Halvard, talking him through memories of his late wife, through the paper star charts he'd hand-drawn as a young man before satellite mapping made the practice obsolete, through the particular quality of starlight over a childhood he described in a voice growing softer with each passing minute. The thing that had silenced 3 systems continued its slow, silent, unstoppable advance. The Concordance of 11's automated early warning translation network, the EWTN, the system every member species trusted completely and understood less with each passing generation of algorithmic self-modification, had already begun registering the anomaly and mistranslating it catastrophically. The EWTN was, by design, built to catch weapons signatures, the telltale energy spikes of an aggressor species preparing an offensive. It was not built, had never been built, to recognize the total absence of energy as a threat category. Its models simply had no clean answer for nothing. So when the anomaly's silence swept past a Threnval listening buoy in the outer reaches of a system called Vesa Thok, the translation core did what every deeply confident, deeply flawed system does when faced with data it cannot pass. It filled in the gap with its nearest available pattern match. And the nearest available pattern match, buried deep in 6 years of low-priority archived chatter from Sol Systems Tier 9 observation post, was a single overnight audio log, flagged, forgotten, never fully translated, of Amara Okonkwo-Reyes, speaking calmly, steadily, without panic, about an approaching ending. The EWTN had never been trained on human hospice dialects. It had never encountered a species that spoke about death the way humans did. Gently, unhurried, wrapped in comfort instead of alarm. Every other species in the Concordance treated an approaching ending as a crisis to be shouted about. Humans, this one human, spoke about it the way you'd speak about weather changing. Calm, measured, almost to a machine-passing tone against threat-indexed baselines. Serene. To the EWTN, serenity in the face of a system-erasing anomaly could only mean one thing. The speaker was not afraid because the speaker was the cause. At 402 hours, without human oversight, without a single command decision made by a single sentient being anywhere in the Concordance, the EWTN auto-classified Amara's ongoing transmission as an extinction priority hostile signal. Origin, Sol System, Tier 9, Species, Human. and it broadcast that classification to all 11-member fleets simultaneously. Amara didn't know any of this. She was still talking to Halvard, her voice never once rising, never once cracking, even as his own voice thinned further, and the strip chart recorder on his end kept its slow, patient, hand-cranked rhythm, the only instrument still willing to tell the truth. "Tell me about the chart," she said. "The one you're drawing right now. Tell me what it looks like." "A flat line," Halvard said, and there was something almost peaceful in his voice now. The particular peace Amara recognized from hundreds of bedsides, the peace that comes not from acceptance of death, but from not being alone in it. A flat, dead straight line running off the edge of the page. "Do you know, in 40 years of this work, I've never once drawn a line that straight. Nature doesn't make straight lines, Amara. Never has. Whatever did this isn't nature." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." "Life support's at 44%, he said. "Not urgently, just a fact, delivered the way you'd note the weather. I think I'd like you to tell me something before this channel goes. Anything. Tell me it mattered. The 40 years. The paper charts nobody uses anymore. The old station nobody upgrades. Tell me it mattered that I stayed." Amara felt something crack quietly in her chest. The particular crack she recognized from every room she'd ever sat in at 3 a.m., the crack that comes just before you say the thing that matters most. She thought for 1/2 second of an elevator ride that took 180 seconds too long. She thought of a colleague's gentle voice saying 3 minutes ago. She thought of every goodbye she never got to say in time. And then she said into a channel she believed only Halvard could hear, "It mattered. You stayed. That's all any of us can do. Stay until the light goes, so nobody has to go into the dark alone. You didn't fail anything, Halvard. You held the line. Rest now." 2 words, spoken not as a command, not as a threat, not as anything but the closing line of a hospice nurse's 20-year vocabulary. The phrase she had used at more deathbeds than she could count, the phrase that meant it's over, you're safe, let go, rest now. At 0407 hours, Halvard Pettersson's channel went silent, not violently, not suddenly, but the way a held breath finally releases. His life support reached 0 at almost the exact same moment the flat line on his hand-cranked strip chart finally ran off the edge of the page. And 4,000 light-years away, 11 advanced civilizations, having just received an extinction priority hostile broadcast from Sol system, translated by a machine that understood rest now as the closing declaration of a weapon already fired, began the single largest simultaneous fleet evacuation in Concordance history. The Threnval Continuum moved first. They always moved first. Theirs was the doctrine of the long listening, a species that had built its entire military philosophy around the idea that silence was both sacred and dangerous, and that the moment a threat stopped announcing itself was the moment it had already begun to strike. An insectoid avian hybrid civilization communicating in layered harmonic tones too complex for most translation systems to render with full nuance. The Threnval trusted their EWTN core completely, the way you trust a religion you were born into rather than one you chose, without examination, because examination had simply never felt necessary. Their flagship, the Aura Kethal, received the extinction priority alert at 0409 hours and folded space towards Sol system within the hour. By the time it arrived, panic had already spread through 9 other concordance systems. Fleets abandoned home orbits without formal evacuation warnings to their own populations. Command structures moving too fast for anything as slow as public notice, trusting that speed itself was the mercy, that getting ships clear before explanation was better than explanation that arrived too late. Amara would later learn, much later, Once she understood the full shape of what had happened, that in the chaos of that unannounced evacuation, 43 civilians across 3 systems died in the crush of ships leaving too fast, in accidents born entirely of unexplained terror. A grim irony she would carry for the rest of her life. Her hospice phrase, meant to end one death gently, had inadvertently caused others through nothing but mistranslation and speed. But it also, without any of the Concordance's 11 civilizations understanding why, evacuated 9 populated systems roughly 19 hours before the real Silence Front, the true source of the original anomaly, still advancing, still silent, still utterly indifferent to any of it, would have reached them with no warning at all. Nobody knew that yet. All anybody in the Concordance knew at 0500 hours was that humanity had somehow transmitted a signal capable of triggering the single largest coordinated evacuation in recorded galactic history, and that the transmission had originated from a single console at a half-abandoned relay station operated by a woman nobody had ever heard of. The Okonkwo arrived in Sol system orbit 4 hours later. Amara was still sitting at her console, the cassette deck in the corner, still quietly recording the log, the way it always did on overnight shifts. When the Threnval warship's shadow fell across the observatory's viewport, and a boarding party, 6 meters tall, feathered in colors no human language had adequate words for, moving with the eerie layered precision of a species that communicated as much through synchronized motion as through sound, arrived to take her into custody. Ferris tried to stand between them and her console. Amara put a hand on his shoulder, the tremor in it barely noticeable now, steadied by something calmer than calm, and said the only thing she could think to say. "It's all right. Let them look. We have nothing to hide." She was wrong about one thing. She had something to hide. She just didn't know yet that it was the truth. The interior of the Okonkwo was built on a scale that made Amara feel, for the first time in her adult life, genuinely small. Not diminished exactly, but recalibrated. The way standing at the base of a mountain recalibrates your sense of your own height. Corridors curved rather than turned, built for a species whose flight instincts had never fully left their architecture, even generations after they'd stopped needing wings to survive. The air carried a faint, resonant hum, a constant low harmonic note she'd later learn was the ship's own translation core, running perpetually, listening to everything, understanding, she would come to realize, almost nothing that actually mattered. She was brought before Threnval Fleet Commander Vexoranth Ilu Kethven in an interrogation chamber shaped like the inside of a shell. Its walls faintly luminous, patterned with concentric rings that pulsed gently in time, with some rhythm Amara couldn't identify. The commander himself, she'd later learn Threnval Command, didn't distinguish sex the way humans did. But he was the closest translation her mind could reach for. Stood nearly 7 feet tall, wings folded tight against an armored carapace. Dark, compound eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt less like anger and more like disbelief. "You are the origin," Vexoranth said, through a translation collar that rendered his layered tones into flat, oddly toneless standard. "The transmission that moved 11 fleets. You are a technician. Tier 9, non-priority." "I'm a listening post operator," Amara said. She didn't sit, though there was a place clearly meant for her to sit. She stood, hands folded in front of her, the way she used to stand in hospice rooms when families needed someone calm to look at. "Before that, I was a nurse for 20 years. The commander's wings shifted, a small motion, but Amara had already begun cataloguing the language of this species, the way she'd once catalogued the smallest changes in a dying patient's breathing. That motion, she suspected, was surprise. "Your transmission," Vexoranth said, "was classified extinction priority. Our EWTN core registered weapon-grade hostile intent. 11 fleets evacuated their home systems based on your words. You will explain what weapon you deployed, technician, or you will explain nothing further at all. Amara took a breath. Not a frightened breath. A patient one. The kind she used to take before delivering the hardest sentence of any given night to a family gathered in a too-bright hospital hallway. I didn't deploy a weapon, she said. I said goodbye to a dying man. The chamber went silent in a way Amara found almost funny if she'd had room left in her for humor. Even the ambient harmonic hum of the walls seemed to falter for half a second. Explain, the commander said. So she did. She told him about Halvard Pettersson, 81 years old, 40 years at a hand-cranked outer system listening post, life support failing at 61% and falling, no rescue possible inside the 4 hours he had left. She told him about the paper strip chart, the flat deadline running off the edge of a page in a universe that doesn't naturally draw straight lines. She told him about the 2 hours and 51 minutes she spent on an open channel, not because protocol required it, nothing required it, but because 20 years of nursing had taught her that nobody should cross that particular threshold without a hand to hold, even if the only hand available was a voice 2 light hours away. And the final transmission, Vex Sorenth said when she reached that point, his voice even flattened through the translation collar, carrying something that might have been the alien equivalent of held breath. The 2 words, our core registered them as a war declaration. Explain them. Amara looked at him steadily. Rest now, she said. It's a hospice phrase. I've said it at more deathbeds than I can count. It means the fight is over. You did everything you could. You're allowed to stop now. You're safe. You're not alone. It's not a command. It's not a threat. It's the gentlest thing I know how to say to someone who's dying, and I said it because a man who spent 40 years of his life listening to an empty universe deserved to hear it before the universe finally listened back. For a long moment, Vex Sorenth said nothing. When he spoke again, something in his tone had shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, the sound of a mind reorganizing an entire framework in real time. Our doctrine, he said slowly, is the long listening. We believe silence before an ending is the most dangerous silence a species can produce, the silence of a predator, patient, certain. We do not believe your species capable of understanding silence at all. You are loud. Your world broadcasts on every frequency, unfiltered, undisciplined. We assumed a species so loud could never comprehend the discipline of an ending faced without noise. He paused. The concentric rings on the chamber walls pulsed once, slow. You sat with a dying man for 171 minutes, he said, and said nothing but comfort into the silence the entire time. That is not the behavior our models predicted from your species. That is not the behavior any of our models predicted from any species below Tier 4 classification. I'm not sure your models have ever met a hospice nurse, Amara said. It wasn't meant as a joke, not entirely, but something in Vex Sorenth's posture. The wings loosening a fraction, the compound eyes tilting in a motion she was beginning to recognize as the Threnval equivalent of surprised recalculation, told her the comment had landed somewhere unexpected. No, he said, we have not. It was in the hours that followed, while Threnval analysts pulled the original archived audio log, ran it through updated translation models, and began for the first time cross-referencing it against the full breadth of human end-of-life dialects, rather than treating it as an anomalous data point, that the second, larger truth of the crisis began to surface. The real silence front. The thing that had actually erased 3 systems' worth of ambient noise, clipped Halvard's array, and continued its slow, patient, utterly undetectable advance through concordant space, while 11 fleets panicked over a mistranslated goodbye. Amara was brought to the Orikethal's primary strategium, A vast circular chamber ringed with floating telemetry displays, harmonics chiming softly as data streamed in from a dozen automated relay points. When the Threnval's own sensor net finally caught what her Tier 9 equipment had caught 6 hours earlier. Total silence, spreading, advancing, systems going dark in perfect unbroken sequence. "Velocity," Vex Soranth said, and his voice had lost every trace of the interrogation chamber coldness it had carried before. This was a different register entirely. Clipped, urgent, a commander's voice. Time to impact on the nearest populated concordance system. A junior officer's harmonics chimed a response that the translation caller rendered flat and terrible. Approach velocity approximately 0.3 c and accelerating. Time to impact on Vesathok Prime. 6 hours, 40 minutes. Vesathok Prime. Amara didn't know the name, but she watched the strategium go rigid with a fear that needed no translation at all. The specific universal fear of watching a number on a countdown clock get smaller. "That's a populated system," she said quietly. 11 billion, Vex Soranth said. Threnval colonial world, 4th largest population center in the continuum. And here was the terrible knot of it. The thing that made Amara's stomach drop, the way it used to drop in the second before a family's face changed forever. The Silence Front's approach had already been detected days ago by the observatory's own outdated equipment. The same manual, unnetworked hardware that had caught the first anomaly before any concordance system flagged it, because it wasn't running on the automated translation cascade that had just spent 6 hours chasing a hospice nurse's kindness instead of the actual threat. But nobody had trusted that warning. It came from a Tier 9 observation post. It came from a species considered too primitive, too analog, too loud to matter. And now the very mistranslation that had bought 9 systems 19 hours of unexplained, panicked evacuation time had also, in the chaos, in the fear, in 11 fleets scrambling over a non-existent weapon, buried the real warning under noise so thoroughly that not a single automated concordance system was tracking the true threat at all. "You need our data," Amara said. "The observatory has been tracking this front's approach signature for 6 hours longer than your systems have. My equipment isn't networked. It never caught the translation cascade error because it was never part of the network your EWTN core runs on. What looks like obsolescence," she met Vex Soranth's compound eyes without flinching, "is actually immunity." What followed was the fastest, strangest negotiation of Amara Okonkwo-Reyes' life, convincing a 7-foot insectoid avian fleet commander in the space of 40 minutes that the only reliable data left in the entire concordance was sitting on decades-old analog hardware aboard a relay station his own people had dismissed as non-critical less than a day earlier. She almost didn't manage it. Threnval doctrine ran deep. The long listening taught that trust in automated systems was trust in discipline itself, and abandoning that trust felt, to officers raised in that tradition, like abandoning discipline entirely. It was Vex Soranth, not Amara, who finally broke the deadlock, and the way he did it stayed with her for the rest of her life. 6 hours ago, he said to his own strategium officers, his layered harmonics carrying a weight that made even the translation caller's flat rendering feel heavy. "Our EWTN core told us a dying man's goodbye was a declaration of war, and 11 fleets believed it without question, because we have never once questioned that system in the whole of my career." And in that same 6 hours, a human woman sat with that dying man for 171 minutes and said nothing false, nothing exaggerated, nothing but the truth as she understood it in the moment she understood it. "I would rather trust the woman who told the truth about an ending than the system that lied about a war." It was, Amara would later think, the single most Threnval sentence she ever heard, and the single most human one too. They routed a live feed from the observatory's manual systems directly into the Orakethal's strategium. Ferris, still stationed at the console back on Earth, his voice tight with a fear he was doing an admirable job of keeping out of his hands, began feeding 6 hours of accumulated telemetry, hand-logged, hand-verified, cross-checked against nothing but human judgment and decades-old instruments too stubborn to fail, into a translation pipeline that, for the first time in the crisis, actually had a human being checking its output at every step instead of trusting it blind. The picture that emerged was worse than anyone had feared, and clearer than anyone had dared hope. The silence front wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even, strictly speaking, hostile. The Threnval's later analysis would suggest it was some kind of naturally occurring stellar phenomenon, a wavefront of exotic particles that scrubbed ambient energy signatures from the space it passed through, entirely indifferent to the civilizations caught in its path, the way a tide is indifferent to sandcastles. It didn't need to be stopped. It needed to be predicted. Its exact trajectory mapped precisely enough that evacuation routing could route ships around its widening edge instead of through its center, where the accumulated energy scrub was lethal to any unshielded life support system in minutes. And the routing data that could do that existed in exactly one place. 6 hours of hand-verified telemetry, cross-referenced against Halvard Peterson's final data before his channel went dark, sitting on a decades-old paper star chart that Amara had, almost without thinking, kept updating in pencil throughout the entire crisis. The same paper chart Halvard had drawn from, the same tradition of hand-plotted astronomy that predated every automated system now scrambling to catch up. "Your automated evacuation routing," Amara said, standing at the Strategium's center console, the tremor in her hand steadier now than it had been in years, "is going to send ships directly through the front's leading edge in—" She checked the numbers. 4 hours and 12 minutes because it's still calculating trajectory off the old data from before the front accelerated. "I have 4 hours and 12 minutes of updated positional data your systems don't have, because my systems were never part of the network that got the trajectory wrong in the first place." Vex Soranth's wings had gone rigid. The posture, Amara now understood, of a commander doing math he didn't like the answer to. "Our automated systems will not accept a manual override from a Tier 9 non-networked source. The command architecture requires—" "Then I'll transmit it myself," Amara said. "Live, my voice. No translation layer standing between what I say and what your systems hear. Because the last time there was a translation layer between what I said and what your systems heard, it turned a goodbye into a declaration of war. I'm not letting that happen twice. Not with 6 hours to impact. Not with 11 billion people on the other end of the math." They gave her the manual transmission key. It was, in its way, almost funny. The largest fleet in the Concordance of 11, folding space and reading stellar telemetry across whole sectors in real time, ultimately depending on a single human hand pressing a single mechanical key. The same basic technology as the telegraph systems Earth had used a century and a half earlier, because it was the only interface left that neither trusted nor required an automated translation layer that had already proven itself catastrophically wrong once. Amara sat at the console, the Orachithal's Strategium gone quiet around her, the particular quiet of a room holding its breath, and felt the old, faint tremor in her left hand, the one that had unsettled alien observers into reading her as neurologically weak, the one that had actually been steadied by 20 years of holding trembling hands in hospice rooms until her own hand learned the same discipline. It was steady enough now. It had always been steady enough when it mattered. "Life support on the observatory is holding at 78%. Ferris's voice crackled through the open channel, tight but controlled. "We're good on this end, Amara, whenever you're ready." She looked, for 1/2 second, at the paper star chart in front of her, Halvard's chart, the one she'd kept updating with her own pencil marks throughout the crisis, the flat, dead line of his final reading still visible at its edge, running off the page into a silence that had, in the end, meant something after all. Then she keyed the transmission. She didn't shout. She never shouted. She spoke the way she'd spoken to Halvard, the way she'd spoken to hundreds of patients across 20 years of overnight shifts. Steady, unhurried, a hand on the small of the galaxy's back, guiding it toward a door it was already walking toward whether it wanted to or not. "This is Amara Okonkwo-Reyes, Deep Silence Observatory Sol System," she said. "I'm transmitting corrected trajectory data for the phenomenon your systems are calling the Silence Front. I'm not a weapon. I was never a weapon. 6 hours ago, I said goodbye to a dying man, and your translation systems heard a threat where there was only kindness. And that mistake, as terrible as it was, bought your fleets time they didn't know they needed. Now I'm asking you to trust something else instead. Not a machine, not an algorithm, just the plain math of 6 hours of patient-verified observation. Reroute your evacuation corridors 17 degrees off current heading. Do it in the next 40 minutes, or the front's leading edge will reach your original routing before your ships clear it." She paused. The whole strategium held that breath with her. "I know what it costs, a system built on the long listening to trust a species you've spent generations dismissing as too young, too loud, too analog to matter," she said. "I'm not asking you to trust humanity. I'm asking you to trust the math. The math doesn't care what tier we're rated." She released the key. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. 11 minutes of a strategium full of 7-foot alien commanders staring at a set of numbers generated by a woman they'd detained as a suspected war criminal that same day, weighing 4,000 light-years of institutional trust in automated systems against a hand-verified paper chart, and a voice that had never once, in the entire crisis, raised itself in fear. It was Vex Soranth who broke the silence, and when he did, his voice carried none of the coldness it had held in the interrogation chamber. "Reroute the fleets," he said. 17 degrees as the human specified. All ships, immediately. Somewhere behind Amara, a junior officer's harmonics chimed something Amara didn't fully understand, and Vex Soranth's translation collar rendered it flat but unmistakable. A question, tentative, almost reverent. "Commander, why do you trust her?" And Vex Soranth answered in a sentence Amara would carry with her for the rest of her life. The sentence that would eventually get quoted in Concordance historical archives across 9 species worth of translated retellings. "Because she has already faced an ending without flinching once today. I would rather follow someone who has practiced that discipline than a machine that has never once faced anything at all." The evacuation corridors shifted. 11 fleets, already mid-flight, already panicked, already scattered across 9 systems by 6 hours of mistranslated terror, rerouted 17 degrees off their original headings in the span of 31 minutes. A maneuver so large and so fast that later Concordance historians would call it, without exaggeration, the single most coordinated defensive action in the Alliance's recorded history. Born not from a shared strategic doctrine, but from the collective, last-minute decision of 11 separate command structures to trust one grieving woman's paper chart over their own automated systems. The Silence Front reached Vesethok Prime's outer approach 4 hours and 9 minutes later. It passed through empty space where 11 fleets should have been, erasing ambient noise from a corridor that held nothing but starlight, and continued on its slow, silent, indifferent way toward the galaxy's edge, having taken nothing from the Concordance of 11 except the noise floor of a stretch of space no one needed anymore. 11 billion people on Vesethok Prime never knew that day how close they had come to an ending. They went about their lives entirely unaware that a hospice nurse 200 light-years away, 4,000 years their species' technological junior, had spent the day sitting with the truth the way she'd once sat with the dying. Steady, unhurried, refusing to look away, and had, in doing so, quietly saved them all. The scene in the strategium afterward was quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet after the worst has been narrowly, improbably avoided. Not celebratory, Not yet, just the slow exhale of beings who had spent hours holding their breath without quite realizing it. Vex Soranth approached Amara at the console, his great wings loosening fully for the first time since she'd arrived aboard the ship, and stood before her not as an interrogator but, Amara understood, as something closer to an equal. The recalibration she'd watched happening in small increments throughout the day now complete. "Our doctrine," he said, "teaches that silence before an ending is the silence of a predator. We built our entire warning network on that assumption. We were wrong. There is another silence, the one you carried into that dying man's final minutes and into this strategium today. Not the silence of a predator waiting to strike, the silence of someone who has already decided not to flinch and has nothing left to prove by being loud about it. It's not a doctrine," Amara said. "It's just what you learn, sitting with people at the end. Fear is loud. Peace is quiet. The trick isn't learning not to be afraid. It's learning to be quiet anyway." Vex Soranth was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his layered harmonics carried something that even the flattening translation collar couldn't fully strip of its weight. "The Concordance's classification of your species," he said, "will change, effective immediately, on my authority and my recommendation to the full council. Not upgraded for military capacity, not upgraded for technological parity. You remain, by every measurable metric, generations behind us in nearly every category that matters to a starfaring civilization. But upgraded permanently, in the one category our doctrine has always claimed to value above all others and has apparently never actually tested until today. The capacity to face an ending without flinching. In that category, Tier 9, non-priority probationary species Earth, ranks first in the Concordance of 11. Effective immediately." She was returned to the observatory 11 hours later, the Aura Kethal withdrawing from Earth orbit with none of the threatening posture it had arrived with, its departure broadcast, at Vex Soranth's own insistence, across every Concordance channel as a formal public reclassification of humanity's standing among the 11 member species. Not as a weapon-bearer, not as a threat, as something the Concordance had genuinely never encountered before and, in its own institutional way, hadn't quite had the vocabulary to categorize until a Tier 9 hospice nurse handed it to them without meaning to. Ferris met her at the airlock, and for a moment neither of them said anything, just the particular silence of two people who'd spent a day believing the other might not come back, standing close enough to confirm they had. "Life support held at 91% the whole time," he said finally, a little unsteadily. "For what it's worth, we never came close to losing the observatory." "Good," Amara said. "That's good, Ferris." She walked back to her console. The same console, the same worn seat, the same faint hum of decades-old equipment that had, in the space of a single overnight shift, quietly become the most trusted instrument in 4,000 light-years of Concordance space. The cassette deck in the corner was still spooling, unbothered by any of it, the way it had spooled through every overnight shift for longer than most of the station's staff had been alive. She sat down. She reached out and, almost without thinking about it, pressed the deck's old record button. The same one Halvard used to tease her about, the same one that had, for 6 years, quietly preserved every conversation she'd ever had with him on this channel, out of habit more than intention. She thought about the elevator ride that had taken 180 seconds too long. She thought about a colleague's gentle voice, 26 years ago now, saying 3 minutes ago. She thought about every goodbye she had never gotten to say in time. The specific ache of arriving after the moment had already closed. The ache that had shaped every year of her life since. The ache that had, in the end, without her ever intending it, taught her exactly what to say to a dying man 2 light hours away, and exactly what an entire galaxy needed to hear in the 6 hours that followed. She spoke into the recorder, quietly, The way she used to speak in hospice rooms at 3 a.m., steady and unhurried, a hand on the small of a grief that had waited 26 years for this exact moment. "Mum," she said, "I know I was late. 3 minutes, and I've carried those 3 minutes every day since, wondering if it mattered, wondering if you were afraid, wondering if I could have done something different if I'd only run a little faster. I don't know if it changes anything, saying this now, but I want you to know, I learned eventually what to say. I learned it too late for you, and I'm sorry for that, more sorry than I've ever said out loud. But I used it. I used everything you taught me, every hour you sat with me when I was small and scared of the dark, every steady thing about you that I didn't know I was absorbing until it was the only thing standing between an entire galaxy and its own fear. So, here it is. The thing I never got to say to you, that I got to say to a dying man on the other side of the solar system instead. And it turned out to matter more than either of us ever could have guessed." She paused. The tremor in her hand had gone almost entirely still. "Rest now, Mum. I'm not late anymore. I finally caught up." She switched off the recorder. Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly beneath the observatory, ordinary and unremarkable and utterly unaware of how close and how quietly it had just changed the shape of a galaxy. Not through strength, not through speed, not through anything the Concordance of 11 had ever thought to measure, but through the oldest, quietest human skill there is, sitting with an ending and refusing to let anyone face it alone.